Yesterday, we started on the first chapter, the human condition. We started with basic fact that everyone grows old, falls sick, and die. And then because of that, the Buddha invites us to live in a wholesome way, to steer us away from living or indulging in the sensual pleasure towards to the direction of the path by moving from a wholesome way of living to a wholesome way of living. Today we are going to continue with this paragraph called The Tribulations of Unreflective Living. In the second section, we explore three aspects of human life that I have collected under the heading, The Tribulations of Unreflected Living. These types of suffering differ from those connected with old age and death in an important respect. Old age and death are bound up with bodily existence and are thus unavoidable, common to both ordinary people and liberated arahants. A point made in the first text of this chapter. In contrast, the three texts included in this section all distinguish between the ordinary person, called the uninstructed worldling, Asutawa Putujana, and the wise follower of the Buddha, called the instructed noble disciple, Sutawa Arya Sawaka. Okay, here let's define tribulations. A cause of great trouble or suffering, a state of great trouble or suffering. So, the great suffering of unreflective living. If we live without reflection, without contemplating the Dhamma, then this is the causes of our great suffering, the tribulations. So how is this different from the previous one that we read? The previous one, old age and death are common to both people like us, the worldlings, and even the arahants. We are all affected by old age and death. Let me highlight this. But in contrast, the three texts distinguish between ordinary person like all of us and the true followers of the Buddha called instructed noble disciple. So this is the important distinction. This is us. This is the Buddha's disciples. Next paragraph, Sister Saikyang, would you like to read?
The first of these distinctions, drawn in text 1, number 1, revolves around the response to painful feelings. Both the worldling and the noble disciple experience painful bodily feelings, but they respond to these feelings differently. The worldlings react to them with aversion, and therefore, on top of the painful bodily feeling, also experiences a painful mental feeling, sorrow, resentment, or distress. The noble disciple, when afflicted with bodily pain, endures such feeling patiently, without sorrow, resentment, or distress. It is commonly assumed that physical and mental pain are inseparably linked, but the Buddha makes a clear demarcation between the two. He holds that while bodily existence is inevitably bound up with physical pain, such pain need not trigger the emotional reactions of misery, fear, resentment, and distress with which we habitually respond to it. Through mental training, we can develop the mindfulness and clear comprehension necessary to endure physical pain courageously, with patience and equanimity. Through insight, we can develop sufficient wisdom to overcome our dread of painful feelings and our need to seek relief in distracting binges of sensual self-indulgence. Thank you.
Thanks again. Okay, this paragraph talks about the difference between us and the noble disciple when experiencing painful bodily feelings. Firstly, and let me highlight this. Yeah. When a pain arises in us, we so painful, so uncomfortable. This is the way we react. I want to remove the pain. I want all the comfort in this world. This is especially true to me with regards to the temperature. A little bit warm, cannot tahan, turn on the aircon. Beep. A little bit too cold, okay, turn off the aircon. So this is how I react with regards to the temperature. Even when showering, I would usually prefer hot shower, especially during this weather, when it's raining. So this is how we usually react. But for the noble disciple, when afflicted with bodily pain, endures such feeling patiently without sorrow, resentment, or distress. Okay, let me highlight this. This is how we normally react. Most people, it is commonly assumed that physical and mental pain are inseparably linked. If we suffer physical pain, then we have to suffer mental pain as well. But this is not the case, at least according to the Buddha. The Buddha makes a clear demarcation between the two. What is demarcation? Let's take a look. Demarcation, the action of fixing the boundary or limits of something, a dividing lines. Yeah. So the Buddha clearly separates these two. What two? Physical and mental pain. Because we have a body, then this body will inevitably bound up with physical pain. But according to the Buddha, such pain need not trigger the emotional reaction of misery, fear, resentment, and distress with which we habitually respond to it. This is a key point. When, with a mental training, we can develop mindfulness, clear comprehension necessary to endure physical pain courageously, with patience, and with equanimity. And through insight, we can develop such wisdom to overcome our dread of painful feelings and our need to seek relief in distracting binges of sensual self-indulgence. Okay, next paragraph. Sister Aikim, would you like to read?
Another aspect of human life that brings to the fore differences between the worldling and the noble disciple is the changing vicissitude of fortune. The Buddhist text neatly reduced this to four pairs of opposites, known as the eight worldly conditions: Ataloka Dhamma, gains and loss, fame and disrepute. praise and blame, pleasure and pain. Text I-2 shows how the worldling and the noble disciple differ in their responses to these changes. While the worldling is elated in success in achieving gain, fame, praise, and pleasure, and dejected when confronted with these undesired opposites, the noble disciple remains unperturbed by applying the understanding of impermanence on both favorable and unfavorable conditions. The noble disciple can abide in equanimity, not attached to favorable conditions, not repelled to unfavorable ones. Such a disciple gives up likes and dislikes, sorrow and distress, and ultimately wins the highest blessings of all, complete freedom from suffering.
Thanks, Sister Akim. Another text that brings the differences between us and the noble disciples is these 8 worldly conditions. When both of us face with these 8 worldly conditions. What are these 8? Gain and loss, fame and disrepute, praise and blame, pleasure and pain. When we encounter gain, fame, praise, and pleasure, we are elated by them. Yeah, this is the way we do. And when confronted with the opposites, we are dejected. Okay. Like this, but the noble disciple, when faced with all these 8, they remains unperturbed. Let's define unperturbed here. Not perturbed or concerned, undisturbed. Yeah. Perturbed, further defined, is, in another word, anxious or unsettled, upset. So this is how the disciples react with regards to these 8 worldly conditions. By applying the wisdom, the understanding of impermanence to both favorable and unfavorable conditions, the noble disciples can abide in equanimity. Such a disciple gives up likes and dislikes, sorrow and distress, and ultimately wins the highest blessings of all. Complete freedom from suffering. Let me highlight this. Okay. Let me see. Next paragraph, Sister Xinghui, would you like to read?
Text I-3 examines the plight of the worldlings at a still more fundamental level. Because they misconceive things, worldlings are agitated by change, especially when that change affects their own bodies and minds. The Buddha classifies the constitutes of body and mind into 5 categories, known as the 5 aggregates subject to clinging. How do I pronounce that?
Panchupadana Khanda. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Form, feelings, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. For details, see page 305 to 07. These 5 aggregates are the building blocks that we typically use to construct our sense of personal identity. They are the things that we cling to as being mine, I, and myself. Whatever we identify with, whatever we take to be a self or the possessions of a self, can all be classified among these five aggregates. The five aggregates are thus the ultimate grounds of identification and appropriation, the two basic activities by which we establish a sense of selfhood. Since we invest our notions of selfhood and personal identity with an intense emotional concern, when the objects to which they are fastened, the five aggregates, undergo change, we naturally experience anxiety and distress. In our perception, it is not mere impersonal phenomena that are undergoing change, but our very identities, our cherished selves, and this is what we fear most of all. However, as the present text shows, a noble disciple has clearly seen with wisdom the delusive nature of all notions of permanent selfhood, and thus no longer identifies with the five aggregates. Therefore, the noble disciple can confront their change without anxious concern, unperturbed in the face of their alteration, decay, and destruction.
Thanks, Sister Xinghui. This paragraph delves in a little bit more on a technical level, talking about the five aggregates of clinging. Yeah, highlight this. This Pali words is actually consists of three different words. Firstly, pancha. Pancha in the Panchasila refers to the five. Upadana refers to clinging, and khanda refers to the aggregates. So it's three words combined into one. Pancha, upadana, khanda. What are these five aggregates? Form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness. This will be elaborated further, much further down the book at page 300. 300 plus. These five aggregates, the Buddha says, are the building blocks that we typically use to construct our sense of personal identity, things that we cling to being a mine, I, and myself. Whatever we identify with, we take to be a self or the possession of self, can all be classified among these five aggregates. And to whatever objects that we cling on to, when they undergo change, we will naturally experience anxiety and distress, this line says. For example, my phone now, I have been using it for 3 years. The battery starts to drain much faster than the original when I purchased it. So this change in the battery life naturally starts to agitate me. Like, oh, why the battery drains so quickly? Maybe it's time to get a new phone. Just a quick example. But you can apply this to anything. Anything you cling on to, you are clinging on to. Maybe your face, like right now, maybe you feel like, oh, this face is still looks quite good looking. Then you can contemplate, oh, 10 years from now, will it still be as good looking? That's one example. Okay, maybe you can read one more paragraph before we close for today, before we end for today. Sister Shwami, would you like to read?
Yeah, so can I?
This line.
Agitation and turmoil afflict human life, not only at the personal and private level, but also in our social interactions. From the most ancient times, our world has been one of violent confrontations and conflict. The names, places, and instruments of destruction may change, but the forces behind them, the motivations, the expressions of greed and hate remain fairly constant. The Nikayas testify that the Buddha was intensely aware of this dimension of the human condition. Although his teaching, with its stress on ethical self-discipline and mental self-cultivation, aims primarily at personal enlightenment and liberation, the Buddha also sought to offer people a refuge from the violence and injustice that wreck human lives in such cruel ways. This is apparent in his emphasis on loving kindness and compassion, on harmlessness in action, and gentleness in speech, and on the peaceful resolution of disputes.
Okay, thanks, Sister Shomei. Okay, this one is more for the third section. We're going to read this further, like how does conflict arise? And this is especially relevant considering the current situation of the war. Okay, I think this is a good time to stop. Any questions or comments? If not, let's do a dedication. 愿消三障诸烦恼，愿得智慧真明了，不愿追将细笑处，世世常行菩萨道。阿弥陀佛。